morning, wildlife detectives. It's good to be with you today to talk about life in a tree. Well, maybe you're wondering why we're talking about trees if you're a wildlife detective. But we're going to start talking about trees because trees support many different types of wildlife. Let's take a deeper look and see what we can discover from the bottom to the top. First, let's look at the whole tree. Well, we're going to start at the bottom with the roots. The roots take up as much space under the ground as the canopy does above the ground. The tree must have a strong root system in order to survive. The nutrients and water are absorbed by the roots, which send it up through the trunk and into the canopy and the leaves. The tree then uses these nutrients to grow, produce flowers, and make seeds. In this photo, you can see that a tree is in full bloom. And then in the two side photos, you can see some seeds, such as the acorn and hickory nuts that the tree has produced. These nuts will then hopefully either be eaten by wildlife or will go into the ground and to help form a new tree. So let's start here. We've already discussed the roots a little bit, so let's concentrate on the parts of the tree that we can see above the ground. We're going to take the trunk and divide it into the lower trunk and the upper trunk. And then we'll also discuss the canopy as to which animals we can find in these parts of the tree. Let's take a look now. To make a tree a good wildlife home, it must provide some type of habitat. You've probably already learned that habitat includes water, shelter, and food. Well, a tree is not going to provide a great deal of water, so only the smaller animals will benefit from any water that may be around the area of the tree. So right now, let's talk about animals that would use a tree for shelter and for food. First of all, let's take a look at the classes of animals. Our classes of animals are divided into invertebrates, or animals with no backbone, and vertebrates, animals with the backbone, which is also called a spine. Let's take a look at some of these now. Here we have our insects and arachnids, including spiders and ticks. Our vertebrates include mammals, birds, which are both warm-blooded, as well as fish, amphibians, and reptiles. Well, our birds are not all carnivores like the owl, so let's add another bird. And mammals are not all herbivores like this little bunny, so let's add a wolf. Okay, I think we're ready to move on. So now we've talked about trees, and we've talked about the classes of animals. It's time to go ahead and put your wildlife detective skills to work. Imagine some of the animals that might like to live around the bottom of a tree. They could be looking for food or shelter. What are you thinking you may see? Hollow and rotting trunks provide shelter and food for the omnivores you see here. Omnivores, such as the skunk, mouse, and fox, eat meat, but they will also eat fruit, berries, and large insects, such as grasshoppers. Can you think of some other omnivores that you might encounter here? Feel free to pause the slideshow at any time if you'd like to think or talk about it. And what's this? Deer don't climb trees. Why are they in our slideshow? Well, that's true. Deer don't climb trees, but male deer, called bucks, communicate with other deer by rubbing their antlers against the trees. They also do this to remove the velvet from their antlers. And this doesn't even cover the great food source that some trees provide for deer. Hey, and take a look at this. Here's an animal that actually gnaws the trees down at the base and then uses the tree to build its home. Can you identify the builder? Well, if you guessed beaver, you're absolutely correct. And the photo of this beaver dam that you see was provided by Tom Knipe at our own Bear Creek Lake State Park, a good place to go and visit if you get a chance. Well, our wildlife so far has been limited to mammals, but now let's move up the tree and see if we can expand our list. Take a look at this bark. This tree has got a rough bark, but some trees have a bark that is more smooth. What do you think the bark could provide for wildlife? Well, you're right if you said, again, food and shelter. Do you see the holes in that tree? They were likely made by a woodpecker. Sometimes you'll hear woodpeckers outside as they drill into the tree. They're looking for insects. They may even drill out a nest hole. After they leave, the cavity that's remaining can be used by other animals. And what about insects in a tree? Let's take a look here. This is an old walnut tree, and look carefully and see what you can find. Can you count the insects in this tree? A closer look reveals ants moving up and down the tree. And look, there goes a larger ant. And what about that black critter right there? You can also notice some of the holes in this tree. And if you listen carefully, you can hear some birds, also inhabitants of the tree. Okay, how many of you counted? Let's move on then and take a look at the top photo. Do you see the dragonfly? He might just be resting, and he might be waiting for dinner. Here's a tree that has a smooth bark. An insect has laid an unusual egg case along here. The insect is an assassin bug. Sounds dangerous, doesn't it? Here's a closer look. The bug that we were looking at moving up and down the tree is a species called a leaf-footed bug. Do you notice how his legs are shaped a little like a leaf? This leaf-footed bug is more a pest of fruit and vegetables, but not to people. The assassin bug is not a pest to people, but he thrives on hunting other bugs. If you look closely at the assassin bug, you will see that he's got a very, very dangerous looking fang, and he uses that to stab the other insects and eat them. Ooh, kind of scary, isn't it? And so, as we continue to move up the tree, we find some carnivores. We also find some different classes of animals. Take a look here. As we continue to investigate life in the tree, we're also able to add more classes of animals. Take a look at this slide. Can you distinguish the two new animal classes that we've come across? If you guessed reptile and amphibian, you're absolutely correct. Also, we know that snakes are carnivores and owls are carnivores, but did you know that a tree frog is also a carnivore in its adult state? As tadpoles, the tree frogs are mostly herbivores, but for tree frog species, they crawl into the tree as adults, live in the tree, eating insects, crickets, moths, and other small invertebrates, and leave the tree once a year to go down to lay eggs before returning back to the trees. Pretty cool, huh? Well, let's continue our journey up, leaving the trunk and moving toward the upper trunk and the canopy. Oh, you're probably already very familiar with this little guy. We see squirrels on a regular basis. They're up the tree, down the tree, and all around. And obviously, they like trees for a number of reasons. Mainly, acorns, other nuts and berries, and a great place to raise their family. So let's move on to some more animals that you might not have associated with a tree. How about this little guy? Have you ever seen a Virginia opossum? Possums, as well as raccoons, are best known for their antics on the ground. Have you ever had a possum or a raccoon raid your trash can? In a tree, possums and raccoons are also looking for food. They find great protein when they eat birds' eggs, and sometimes even baby birds. That means this little goldfinch has got to learn to watch his back. I'm sure you can see by now that there's a lot of interconnectedness between the species that live in the tree. And sometimes the wildlife enjoying dinner at the bottom of the tree becomes the dinner for the wildlife looking for dinner that may be at the top of the tree or around the tree. All of this is part of the food web. The food web is a natural system of checks and balances to keep populations in line. Well, we've taken a great look at animals that live in a tree and around a tree. What have we left out? Hey, what are you doing here? Oh, you're right. Fish don't live in trees. But we wanted to be sure and include you anyway. A fish is an aquatic animal, but still a very important member of the animal classes, and a very important member of the food chain as well. Well, it looks like it's time for us to head off. We've reached the canopy of the tree and only covered a very few of the animals that you can find here. So it's your turn now. I'd like for you to go outside, stand near a tree, and see what life you can find from the bottom to the top. Historians write about it, musicians sing about it. It's even the name of a cartoon character. It's poison ivy, and if you touch it, it's probably going to make you itch. Let's take a few minutes today to see what you may know and what you can learn about this unfriendly member of the plant family. Take a look at the three photos here. In photo 1, you notice a young poison ivy plant. It's a light green color, it has shiny leaves, and the leaves are divided into clusters of 3. As a matter of fact, only 3 leaves in this picture. Often people help to identify this plant by looking for something that they call thumbs on the plant. Watch the arrows and see as they point out the thumbs if you can identify them also. Here we go. Okay, that's a thumb. Now you know what to look for. Can you spot another one? Yep, right there. How about a third thumb? Oh, very good. Okay, do you notice how it's easier to see the thumbs on the large center leaf than either of the 2 side leaves? Okay, so now let's move on to photo 2. In photograph number 2, we have more poison ivy plants. They're not quite as shiny, and the thumbs are not as easy to find. That's most likely to be the poison ivy that you run into when you're out in the yard playing, because you don't notice it as much. And take a look at the photo for number 3. Again, leaves of 3 and thumbs, but you really have to look hard to see them. The poison ivy that we're looking at now is growing along the ground, but that is not always the case, as you'll see in our next slide. Poison ivy doesn't just grow on the ground. Look at this vine. All parts of this vine with hairy roots are part of a poison ivy plant. The roots, the stems, and the leaves all contain the oil urushiol, which is responsible for causing the rash. If you should happen to encounter poison ivy and are able to wash the area with warm soapy water as soon as possible after coming in contact with poison ivy, you may be able to remove the oil. Rubbing alcohol, as a matter of fact, dissolves urushiol, so that may also be helpful to rub on the area that's been touched by the poison ivy. Well, let's say that you're walking through the woods and you come across a tree that looks like this. Leaves are growing all over that tree from the bottom of the trunk on up. Let's see if we can figure out what's going on here. Okay, so there are bright green leaves on the trunk. Let's see if we can identify this plant. We are looking for leaves arranged in clusters of 3. We're also looking to see if some of the leaves have what we would describe as thumbs on them. And we also want to look and see, like in the lower left of the photograph, can you tell that the vine is also growing along the ground? Oh, yeah. Now look hard, but don't get too close. There are also hairy roots growing up this tree trunk. I believe that this tree is covered in poison ivy. Poison ivy can be harmful in summer, spring, fall, and winter. It's not a friend to people at any time. So poison ivy is not really your friend unless you're a bird. Poison ivy has wonderful wildlife benefits for birds and other animals, especially in the wintertime. Let's think of some phrases to help us steer clear of poison ivy. They're good things to remember when you're in the woods and you see plants in clusters of 3. Hairy vine, no friend of mine. Berries of white, run with fright. Leaves of 3, leave them be. And in the photo below, you'll see leaves of 3, poison ivy leaves, but the berries are green. That simply means that they haven't matured into the ripe berries yet. All right, well, you're on your way to be a poison ivy expert. I think it's time for a quiz. Let's take a look at the next photo. Okay, I'd like you to use your identification skills and take a minute or two and come up with the plant that you believe to be poison ivy. Did you figure out that it's photo number 2? What identification skills did you use to help you figure this one out? If you did think it was photo 2, great job on that. I think now that you are absolutely ready to be certified as a poison ivy expert. Thanks for allowing me to talk with you today, and Ms. Eanes, congratulations to your wonderful wildlife detectives. Bye-bye.